In 1911, a British naval officer made a decision that would reshape the global order for the next century. And Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, ordered the Royal Navy to abandon coal and convert entirely to oil. The consequences of that choice determined which nations would rise and which would fall, which economies would prosper and which would collapse. Ultimately, it decided which country would become the world's sole superpower. Today, we stand at an identical crossroads. The energy source that powered the last 100 years of global dominance is being replaced. But this time, the stakes are exponentially higher. The resources are concentrated in different hands. The nation that controls them will not simply lead the world, it will define the very structure of the 21st century economy. Throughout history, superpowers have not been built on military might alone. They have been constructed on a foundation far more durable and far more valuable: control over the energy that moves economies. The pattern is consistent and undeniable across centuries of geopolitical shifts. When a civilization dominates the primary energy source of its era, it doesn't just participate in the global economy, it writes the rules. The British Empire didn't conquer a quarter of the world's population by accident. It controlled the coal that powered the Industrial Revolution, and with it, the steam engines that built the factories, moved the goods, and commanded the seas. The transition from one energy system to another has never been peaceful or equitable. Each shift creates a period of instability where old powers desperately cling to fading resources, while new contenders position themselves to capture the future. These transitions last decades, but their outcomes are determined by decisions made in narrow windows of opportunity. History reveals three immutable laws of energy transitions. First, the nation that controls energy extraction controls the supply. Second, the nation that controls energy refinement controls the price. Third, and most critically, the nation that controls both extraction and refinement controls the geopolitical order. This pattern has repeated itself without exception. By 1900, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled more than 90% of refined oil in the United States. This monopoly represented the first glimpse of how petroleum would reshape global power structures. But Rockefeller's dominance was domestic, limited to American markets, and constrained by national boundaries. The true transformation came when Churchill made his fateful decision in 1911. Oil-powered ships could travel farther, move faster, and required fewer crew members than coal-burning vessels. The strategic advantages were overwhelming, but Britain faced an existential problem. It had abundant coal deposits, but virtually no oil reserves. To secure this new energy lifeline, the British government took an unprecedented step in 1914. It purchased a controlling 51% stake in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, establishing direct government ownership of foreign oil extraction. This move wasn't about business profits. It was about survival. It was about ensuring that the Royal Navy could access the fuel that would determine victory or defeat in the coming World War. Despite this strategic positioning, Britain's oil dependence became its undoing. The 1973 OPEC oil embargo demonstrated how quickly energy control could weaponize economics. Arab oil-producing nations implemented production cuts that quadrupled oil prices from $2.90 per barrel in September 1973 to $11.65 by January 1974. The economic devastation was immediate and severe. The United States economy contracted by approximately 2.5%, unemployment surged, and inflation spiraled into double digits. According to a 1975 Federal Energy Administration report to Congress, the embargo caused approximately 500,000 Americans to lose their jobs and resulted in a GDP loss between $10 billion and $20 billion. But the United States learned from this crisis in ways that Britain never could. In 1974, the U.S. government negotiated a secret agreement with Saudi Arabia that would be officially classified until 2016. This petrodollar system ensured that all global oil sales would be denominated exclusively in U.S. dollars in exchange for American military protection and arms sales. The genius of this arrangement extended far beyond oil transactions. Every nation that needed to purchase oil, which meant virtually every industrialized economy, first needed to acquire U.S. dollars. This created permanent structural demand for American currency, effectively making the dollar the world's reserve currency and cementing U.S. financial dominance for the next 5 decades. The world is witnessing the early stages of the next great energy transition. Electric vehicle battery demand reached more than 1 terawatt-hour in 2024 for the first time in history, marking a 40% increase from the previous year. According to the International Energy Agency's projections, this demand will triple to more than 3 terawatt-hours by 2030. This exponential growth creates an entirely new resource dependency. Modern electric vehicle batteries require 3 critical minerals: lithium for energy storage, cobalt for thermal stability, and rare earth elements for the electric motors. Unlike oil, which is relatively widely distributed across dozens of producing nations, these minerals are concentrated in the hands of remarkably few countries. China has positioned itself with stunning strategic precision. While it controls approximately 60% of global rare earth mining, the real dominance lies downstream. China processes nearly 90% of all rare earth elements worldwide. This processing monopoly means that even minerals mined in the United States, Australia, or Africa must be shipped to Chinese refineries before they can be used in manufacturing. The Democratic Republic of Congo produces more than 70% of the world's cobalt supply. But ownership tells a different story. Chinese companies have invested billions into Congolese mining operations, securing long-term contracts and building processing facilities that funnel this critical mineral into Chinese supply chains. The Lithium Triangle, composed of Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, holds nearly 50 million metric tons of lithium reserves, representing almost 60% of the world's identified resources. Australia currently leads in production with 88,000 metric tons in 2024, but China has again moved to control the refinement bottleneck, processing the majority of Australia's lithium ore into battery-grade materials. Indonesia provides perhaps the clearest example of this strategic positioning. The nation possesses the world's largest nickel reserves, and nickel is essential for certain battery chemistries. In 2024, more than 40% of global nickel demand was supplied by Indonesian mines. But according to Benchmark Mineral Intelligence, 82% of Indonesia's battery nickel output in 2024 came from majority Chinese-owned producers. China's dominance in this sector didn't happen by chance. Beginning in the 1990s, the Chinese government implemented a comprehensive strategy to secure critical mineral supply chains. This included domestic mining expansion, massive investments in processing technology, strategic acquisitions of foreign mining assets. It also involved patient, long-term contracts with resource-rich but capital-poor nations. The United States, meanwhile, finds itself in a position eerily similar to Britain in 1911. According to a 2024 analysis, the United States is 100% import-reliant for 11 key mineral commodities essential to advanced manufacturing. The country possesses deposits of many critical minerals, but decades of environmental regulations, permitting delays, and lack of processing infrastructure have created a dependency. This dependency would take years to reverse. The 2022 Inflation Reduction Act represents America's first comprehensive response to this vulnerability. The legislation provides a 10% tax credit for domestic production of critical minerals and battery components, attempting to rebuild the supply chains that have atrophied over decades. But incentives alone cannot overcome the fundamental reality. China has a 20-year head start in building the infrastructure, developing the expertise, and securing the relationships that define the battery mineral economy. The parallels to the oil-dominated 20th century are not merely historical curiosities. They are predictive frameworks for understanding what comes next. Just as the petrodollar system gave the United States extraordinary economic leverage, control over battery mineral processing could create a mineralian system. This system could provide similar structural advantages for China. Consider the mechanisms of control. Every electric vehicle manufactured in the United States, Europe, or Japan requires battery materials that have likely passed through Chinese processing facilities. This creates dependency that goes far beyond simple trade relationships. It embeds Chinese influence into the fundamental infrastructure of the energy transition. The economic implications are staggering. Bloomberg New Energy finance projects that global electric vehicle sales will reach 42 million units annually by 2030, up from 17 million in 2024. Each vehicle requires approximately 60 kilograms of lithium, 10 kilograms of cobalt, and smaller quantities of rare earth elements. The multiplication is straightforward. Whoever controls the processing of these materials controls a multi-trillion-dollar market. But the true power extends beyond economics into geopolitics. The 1973 oil embargo demonstrated how energy control could be weaponized to achieve political objectives. China has already shown willingness to use rare earth access as diplomatic leverage, implementing export restrictions during trade disputes. As battery minerals become more critical to national security, defense industries, and economic prosperity, this leverage will only intensify. The United States and its allies have recognized this vulnerability, triggering a global competition for mineral access. The Inflation Reduction Act's provisions require that electric vehicles must contain a specified percentage of domestically processed critical minerals to qualify for tax incentives. European nations have launched similar programs through their Critical Raw Materials Act. This has sparked what can only be described as a new resource scramble. Western nations and Chinese entities are competing for mining rights across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Investment in mineral extraction projects surged to record levels in 2024, with governments treating these deals as matters of national security rather than simple commercial transactions. The competition extends to technological development. Companies and governments are racing to develop alternative battery chemistries that reduce or eliminate dependence on the most geopolitically sensitive minerals. Sodium-ion batteries, solid-state batteries, and other emerging technologies represent attempts to engineer around the supply chain vulnerabilities. But here's the critical insight that most analysts miss. Technological substitution takes time, requires massive capital investment, and doesn't eliminate the fundamental problem. It merely shifts it to different minerals with different concentration patterns. There is no easy technological escape from the reality of geological distribution. The infrastructure requirements present another enormous hurdle. Building a single lithium processing facility takes approximately 5 to 7 years from planning to operation. Developing a new mine can take even longer when accounting for environmental reviews, permitting, and community negotiations. China has been building this infrastructure for 2 decades. The West is attempting to catch up in less than 1. The conventional wisdom suggests that the coming energy war will be won by whoever mines the most minerals or builds the most processing facilities. This analysis misses the deeper pattern that history reveals. The nation that will dominate the next century is not the one that digs the most holes in the ground. It is the one that controls the technological ecosystem that processes, refines, and integrates these materials into finished products. Britain lost its superpower status not because it lacked coal, but because other nations developed better ways to use energy. The United States didn't dominate the oil century because it had the most reserves. It dominated because it built the refineries, the petrochemical industries, and the financial systems that turned crude oil into economic power. The real competition isn't about lithium mines in Chile or cobalt deposits in Congo. It's about who develops the most efficient battery manufacturing processes, who creates the intellectual property for next-generation energy storage. It's also about who builds the integrated supply chains that turn raw materials into the infrastructure of the electric age. China's current advantage in mineral processing is significant, but not insurmountable. The critical question is whether Western nations possess the political will, the industrial policy coherence, and the long-term strategic patience to build competitive alternatives. The Inflation Reduction Act and similar programs represent a starting point, but they are only the first chapter in what will be a multi-decade competition. Here's what almost everyone gets wrong about energy transitions. They don't replace the old system, they layer on top of it. Global oil consumption hasn't declined despite the rise of electric vehicles. It continues to grow because emerging economies are still industrializing, and they're using every available energy source simultaneously. The battery mineral economy will add to global resource competition rather than substituting for it. The true winners of the coming energy war will be nations that recognize this complexity and refuse to make the same mistakes as previous powers. They will diversify supply chains rather than creating new monopolies. They will invest in recycling and circular economy principles to reduce virgin material dependence. They will balance rapid deployment with environmental sustainability, understanding that destroying water tables and ecosystems to mine green energy minerals is not a victory. It's just a different kind of resource curse. The transition we're living through will determine not just which nation leads the world, but what kind of world we'll inhabit. The decisions being made now about mineral extraction, processing capacity, and supply chain architecture will shape geopolitics for the next century. The only certainty is this: the nations that control the energy of tomorrow will write the rules for everyone else. The energy war isn't coming, it's already begun. Most people don't even realize they're living through it.